think there's no question that Israel and the lobby here in the United States will go to enormous lengths to undermine any form of meaningful settlement between the United States and Iran. If there was no Israel involved here, the United States and Iran could cut a deal. Not easily, but rather easily. Iran is not a meaningful threat to the United States, and it makes good sense for us to work out some sort of modus vivendi with Iran. There's no question about that. The problem is Israel and the lobby. And the idea that we would cut a deal with Iran that left Iran in really good shape. Okay, they'd have limited nuclear enrichment, but in this deal, they'd be in quite good shape. Their economy would recover. There'd be a security architecture in place. They'd get reparations. They'd have control of the Strait of Hormuz, something along those lines. This would drive the Israelis absolutely crazy, and it would drive the lobby crazy, and they'd go to great lengths to undermine the agreement. And the first place they'd start is with regard to Hezbollah and Hamas. Because from an Iranian point of view, supporting Hezbollah and Hamas is absolutely essential. And of course, when Iran talks about a ceasefire, they're not just talking about a ceasefire between the United States and Iran. They're talking about a ceasefire that involves Hezbollah. And you see, every time we begin to move down the road toward some sort of meaningful ceasefire, the Israelis unleash the dogs on Hezbollah, violate the ceasefire, and that trouble just never seems to end, because what the Israelis are trying to do is undermine any possible agreement that we get. So this is just another reason that I'm remarkably pessimistic about what's going to happen here in terms of achieving a ceasefire. But I will say the big problem that we face is if you don't get a ceasefire and this war goes on and on and on into the summer, the economic consequences are going to be greater and greater. And that's going to cause not only problems for Trump, but for the world economy. And at some point, we're going to have to land like a ton of bricks on the Israelis and put an end to their obstinacy, to their opposition, because the damage to the international economy will be too great. But that's the only way I see us getting some sort of meaningful agreement.
When it comes to the pro-Israel lobby, Professor Mearsheimer, do you believe that over the past couple of years, its influence has reduced here in the U.S. when it comes to U.S. politics, in terms of AIPAC, and how even contenders in the upcoming midterm elections have been distancing themselves from the lobby? If they, receive money from AIPAC, that has become somewhat of a rejection by their constituents. And so do you also feel that shift? We see that in Congress. Do you also see that in terms of the influence of the lobby?
Yeah, this is a great question. I want to answer it very carefully. I think in terms of actual policy, the lobby is as powerful as ever. One could almost make the argument that the lobby is more powerful in the Trump administration than it was in the Biden administration. And it was enormously powerful in the Biden administration. But I'm actually quite shocked at the extent to which Israel and the lobby get their way almost every time with Trump. It's quite remarkable. So nothing has changed there. And if anything, the lobby is more powerful than ever. However, there is no question that support for Israel and criticism of the lobby in the body politic, both on the left and on the right, both in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party, has undergone a sea change that I find hard to fathom, given that I wrote the book about the power of the lobby with Steve Walt, and really never dreamed that we'd reach a point like the one that we're at today in terms of how the American public thinks about Israel and thinks about the lobby. And you're absolutely right that in these midterm elections, you're going to see politicians for the first time talking about Israel and talking about the lobby and thinking about how to deal with the lobby in ways we've really never seen before. And the consequences of that will be very interesting to see, and they may very well affect policy down the road. But to go back to my original first point in answering your excellent question is we have not seen any evidence of a change in policy so far.
Sure. Trita, would you like to respond to Professor Mearsheimer? I have another question for him.
I think John makes some great points. Whether they're more powerful or not, it is interesting to see. It's not just what the outcome is, it's also what the process is. And even if undoubtedly they have still continued to win a lot of major fights, the amount of resistance, the amount of fight that they have to put in, the amount of resources they have to put in order to win those fights is dramatically higher than it was before. So it is becoming costlier to be successful for them because the resistance in so many different places is so much higher. I think we are reaching a tipping point. One of the challenges that exists, of course, is that, for instance, if you take a look at the Democratic Party now, the base is just completely opposed to a lot of these policies in support of Israel. And this is true in almost every, if not every demographic within the Democratic Party. It no longer is just young people or progressives, it's also more conservative Democrats. But we don't necessarily have the production of a large number of a deep bench of democratic policy experts that can go into government, let's say they were to win in 2028, with that mentality. Instead, we still have plenty of them, the same folks more or less that were in the Biden administration that are completely out of touch with the Democratic base on this issue. And I think we're going to see the same problem on the Republican side in a couple of years or so, because it's shifting very fast there as well. There is not just an issue of whether you are a young or an older Republican, if you're evangelical or not, or Catholic. It's also whether you watch YouTube to get your news or whether you're watching Fox News. A dramatic difference. I mean, probably one of the most decisive differences, which is where are you getting your news from? So are you a YouTube Republican or are you a Fox News Republican? But the production of the type of policy experts that can come in and that can reflect these changes have still not really occurred. And that's going to create a lag in which you will see the distance between where the public is on this issue and where policy is to continue to grow a little bit longer before the two converge back again.
Sure. Thank you for that. Professor Mearsheimer, I just wanted to move to Russia and China. Iran's foreign minister, Araghchi, recently met with Putin and also Chinese officials, including discussions around a reported 4-point Chinese proposal. Which of these powers do you believe is more exposed to the economic fallout of the blockade? And do you see either willing or able to exert real pressure on Washington or Tehran? How do you see the roles of China and Russia evolving over the next few days?
Well, I think in the short term, both China and Russia benefit from this war. Just to take the Russian case, sanctions have been lifted off the selling of Russian oil because we, the United States, have a vested interest in getting as much oil into global markets as possible. Furthermore, the longer this war goes on, the less weaponry the United States has to give to the Ukrainians, which obviously works to the advantage of the Russians. And I could tell similar stories about the Chinese. Mainly the fact that we're pivoting away from Asia to the Persian Gulf, which works to China's advantage. But the problem is that we run the risk here of wrecking the world economy, and that will be a tremendous blow to both China and Russia. And I think China and Russia and almost every other country on the planet, except for maybe Israel, is profoundly scared about the possibility that the world economy is going to go off a cliff. And that prospect gives everyone, the Chinese and the Russians included, a powerful incentive to shut this war down. Now, I think there's no question that China and Russia can put and have put pressure on Iran to settle this war. I think that's especially true of the Chinese. And the Chinese have been talking to the Pakistanis and working with the Pakistanis to get them to act as mediators. But in the final analysis, the Iranians are not going to bend to pressure from China or Russia. The Iranians are going to do, as they should, what is best for themselves. The Iranians understand that they operate in a self-help world. And furthermore, they understand that the two states that they're opposing in this conflict, Israel and the United States, are genocidal states. And if you're dealing with two genocidal states, you better do what's in your own security interest and not take what the Chinese and the Russians say too seriously. Again, you don't want to ignore them, but at the same time, I think from Iran's point of view, they have to do what's in their interest. So there are limits to how much pressure the Chinese and the Russians can put on them. Again, my bottom line here is it's not until the international economy begins to approach the precipice that we're going to get any real movement to put an end to this conflict.
Interesting. Trita, please feel free to respond to John, but I also wanted to ask you about Pakistan's role in all of this. Professor Mearsheimer mentioned that it's the Chinese that are pressuring Pakistan to act as intermediaries. How do you see Pakistan's role? Does it have the capacity or the leverage to shape the current negotiations? There was a time when people thought that perhaps they were pushing America's agenda. Of course, the Pakistanis denied that completely. How do you think the Iranians view Pakistan's role in all of this?
Look, at the end of the day, the Iranians have welcomed the Pakistanis playing this role. They have not raised a fuss about having the meetings somewhere else. And they want to have a strong relationship with Pakistan. In the background, there are other states that are helping the Pakistanis, the Omanis, the Qataris, because at the end of the day, they have far more experience in mediating between the US and Iran. Pakistan is very new to this game. But Pakistan stepped up and has played a role. It's been called helpful. I've heard it from both sides that they're happy with it. But we have to understand at the end of the day, it's not the Pakistanis that are going to resolve this issue. This has to be resolved by the Iranians and the American side, or because there's some other entity that pressures both of them into some form of agreement. And that's not going to be Pakistan. That would be, as I think John alluded to, it would be the Chinese at the end of the day. But the Chinese are not going to do it at this point. In fact, they have pushed Iran a little bit, but it's not also their style to go in too aggressively. And if they were, I'm not necessarily sure that they were going aggressively pressuring the Iranians more so than pressuring the United States. They're not going to foolishly make themselves an instrument in Trump's pressure strategy with Iran because they don't believe in it. We saw, for instance, that the Iranian foreign minister was in Beijing just in the last 2 days. And I think he tweeted something along the lines that they trust the Chinese. And I think that's a very significant statement that was made there. The Chinese also are finding themselves in a situation in which a bit of the dynamic in their relationship with Iran has changed. Clearly, the Iranians need the Chinese, but Iran also now has a bit of a leverage over the Chinese. And they're not going to be shy exercising it. They have been offering the Chinese discounted oil for more than 10, 15 years now at a rate of 15 to 20% as a result of sanctions. And they have become extremely dependent on China as one of the few places that still buys a lot of this. So they're more than happy to continue a very strong relationship with China, but they don't want to be that dependent on the Chinese.
Sure. Thank you. Professor Mearsheimer, what fractures are emerging among Gulf states in response to this conflict, whether in their relations with the US, their posture toward Iran, or their broader security strategies? We just heard about Saudi Arabia refusing its bases for Project Freedom. It was just a temporary refusal. They have now reverted to offering their bases. But how do you see this? And are we moving toward a more fragmented regional order with shifting alignments, or is there any realistic path toward a more formalized security architecture?
Well, I look at what's happening in terms of the Gulf states and the United States in two different ways. One is I focus on relations between the United States and the GCC states. And then I look at what's happening inside the GCC. And I think it's quite clear that there has been enormous damage done to relations between the United States and the Gulf states. We got them into this war, And the understanding was that we would provide a security umbrella for them. And instead, what has happened is that those American bases on their territory have acted as giant magnets for Iranian ballistic missiles and drones. And they've suffered significantly as a result. And there is the ever-present threat that if the war really heats up, if the Americans truly escalate, that some of those states will be literally destroyed. So from the point of view of the Gulf states, the United States can no longer be seen as a reliable ally. In the final analysis, they may have no choice but to depend somewhat on the United States. But I think for almost all of those states, the relationship with the United States has been changed forever. With regard to relations among the Gulf states themselves, the UAE and the Saudis had terrible relations before the war started on February 28th. Those relations have only gotten worse. And I think moving forward, what you're going to see is further divisions, further cracks or exacerbated cracks inside the GCC, not only between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, but among other states as well. I think a lot of those states are going to have to think about what their relationship is going to be with Iran moving forward. And I think a good case can be made that if you're Saudi Arabia, you want to distance yourself somewhat from the United States, and you want to concentrate on working out a modus vivendi with Iran. If you're Saudi Arabia, you simply have no interest in permanent hostility or a deep-seated security competition with Iran. It just doesn't make sense. You want to go to great lengths to have, as I said, some sort of modus vivendi. And that will have an effect on how Saudi Arabia relates to Kuwait, because who knows where Kuwait will come down on this. As best I can tell, and of course Trita would know more than me, I think that Kuwait and the UAE are the two most anti-Iranian, pro-American states in the GCC. And it may be that those two states ally with the United States moving forward and remain hostile to Iran. But it seems quite clear that that will definitely be the case for the UAE. But it could be that the UAE is a real outlier here, and almost all the other states work out some sort of arrangement with Iran. My final point on this would be it looks like Oman and the Iranians are going to end up working together to control the Strait of Hormuz moving forward, in which case Oman is obviously not going to be a mortal enemy of Iran, and if anything, will work out some sort of modus vivendi with Iran. So anyway, all of this is to say that if you look at what existed on February 27th, in terms of our basing structure, our meaning the American basing structure and our alliance structure in the Gulf, and what relations looked like among the Gulf states themselves, you see fundamental change has already taken place, and probably greater change will take place moving forward.
Thank you. Trita, you have the last word on this. And if you'll also say what would the alternative security structure look like, that would be great. And then we'll move to audience Q&A.
So, John is quite correct that the status quo of the past is gone, but also implicitly in what John says is that there is no such thing as a GCC any longer. Yeah. This is not a united entity in any way, shape, or form. In fact, the division between Saudi Arabia and the Emirates actually appears to be deeper than that between Iran and the UAE, and that between the Iran and UAE is very, very deep. And, you know, you have very different perspectives in Doha and Muscat compared to Manama and Abu Dhabi about what direction the region's security should go going forward. Some of them are going to do exactly what John said. They're going to find some sort of a way of having a balance with Iran and some sort of a coexistence. They're probably going to include economic integration as part of that as a security measure, to make sure that it raises the cost of any future conflict and raises or reduces the incentives for it. Whereas others like the UAE and perhaps Bahrain, potentially even Kuwait would go in an opposite direction and try to complement the failure of the American security umbrella by intensifying their collaboration with Israel. I think that would be an extremely foolish mistake. In fact, I think the Abraham Accords that the Emiratis signed with the Israelis is part of the reason why they're now in this terrible situation. They had an enmity with Iran, and Israel had its own enmity with Iran. The Israeli enmity with Iran is much, much deeper than the Iranian Emirati enmity. But the Emiratis made themselves a frontline state in Israel's battle with Iran, despite the fact that they're so much closer to Iran geographically. So they're taking the brunt of that. There's been arguments in the Iranian press that as part of a potential failure of a deal, and there's some new status quo between between Iran and Israel in the region, the Iranians should respond to any Israeli attack in Lebanon by attacking the UAE. Lebanon, or at least Hezbollah, is an Iranian ally, and UAE is openly saying that they are now a strategic ally of Israel. So if the Israelis strike an Iranian ally, Iran will strike an Israeli ally. How on earth is that in any way, shape, or form in the UAE's interest to end up becoming that type of an arena for the Israeli-Iranian rivalry? And if the Kuwaitis were to do the same, they're even closer. They have a land border with Iran. That would be absolutely insane in my view. But unfortunately, that risk does exist, and it would be very bad for the region as a whole. I think a movement towards a security architecture that is built on inclusive security, that is not trying to organize half the region against the other half in the manner that the Abrams Accord did, is the right way forward. I think there's far greater maturity in the region to move in that direction compared to 10 years ago. Emotions, of course, are very, very high right now because of the ongoing war. But I do think that there's a higher likelihood, not high, but a higher likelihood in a movement in that direction than any period that I've seen in the last 25 years. And also a realization that at the end of the day, if the United States and Israel, one superpower and the other one a nuclear power, could not take out Iran, none of these other states stand a chance in a conflict. So they have to find some way of coexisting with Iran rather than trying to double down on some sort of a coercive containment of Iran, thinking that will provide security for them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to now we only have time for just a couple of questions. So there is one by Mike Hager. He says, has the war in Iran provided an opportunity for the US to abandon its imperialistic ambitions? What is the effect of the decline in public support for Israel? The second part was already answered, but the first part, I'll read out that question and also the next one, and then whoever wants to answer. Under what conditions do you think Iran will demand the full withdrawal of Israel from 53 to 67% of Gaza it now occupies, and opening of border crossings as part of its negotiations with the US? Do you believe Iran will be successful in that effort? Professor Mearsheimer, would you like to answer the question about Iran? Has this provided an opportunity for the U.S. to abandon its imperialistic ambitions?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at both of those because they're somewhat related. I think that the United States is going to remain joined at the hip with Israel for the foreseeable future. I laid out the arguments and then Trita really nicely elaborated on my argument as to why things are not going to change right away. That means the Iranians can demand that Israel withdraw from southern Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, and the West Bank, and it'll fall on deaf ears because the United States will protect Israel. It's just not going to happen. With regard to the first question, about American imperial ambitions, I assume that question had to do with the American military presence in the Persian Gulf. And we've talked about the fact that the United States' basing structure has been basically wrecked, and who knows whether we will go back to any of those bases. But I would say that because of Israel, we will not leave the broader Middle East. in any meaningful way in terms of pulling out our military forces. A number of people have said that what we should do is just walk away from the Middle East. That's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen because of Israel and the lobby. We are going to remain involved, and we're probably likely to have close relations with the UAE and Israel moving forward, which is not necessarily a smart thing to do, but is what I think we will be inclined to do. So my bottom line here is because we're joined at the hip with Israel and with the lobby, we're not going anywhere in any meaningful way away from the Middle East. And in terms of putting pressure on Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories, I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, on that dismal note, I mean, there are a couple of other questions, John. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to let everybody know that Trita had a 7 p.m. Al Jazeera interview for which he had to leave, and he just wanted to thank everyone for their time. Professor Mearsheimer, would you be able to take a couple more questions?
Sure.
Thank you so much. So, there is this, I don't know whether you're on Twitter and whether you've been seeing this, a lot of Iranian government-linked accounts and some Iranian, but perhaps not necessarily linked with the government, Iranian embassies, but then also the viral Lego videos. I don't know whether you have seen those. They have made quite an impact with American audiences. And I'm wondering how and they have sort of in their outreach, reached out directly to American audiences and have sort of appealed to them and appealed to their sense of justice and tried this sort of peoples to peoples diplomacy. And I'm wondering what implications that would have going forward in terms of how the American public has been able to sort of circumvent the stereotypes with which it has, been conditioned to believe about Iran and the Iranian people.
I've watched about 15 of those videos. And in fact, one of them includes me in the video. On 2 separate occasions I'm mentioned in the video. So I was quite intrigued to see that. I think the videos, as your comments indicate, are brilliant. I think all sorts of people watch them. Lots of people send them to me and say that this is a brilliant video, you should watch it. And I'm sure that there is little doubt that these videos appeal to younger people. They're done very well, very professionally, and they're very sophisticated. And the story they tell is, at least to me, a compelling story. I think that the Legos do a really good job of getting the Iranian point of view across and make it clear that the Iranians are not the devil incarnate. And that the United States and Israel are not simply the good guys fighting against the bad guys. So I think that there's no question that this use of Legos by the Iranian authorities is very effective.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Professor Mearsheimer. Just because we are out of time, if there are any ending thoughts that you would like to sort of share with us, just perhaps what do you see as breaking out of this current impasse that we are at?
Well, Trita seems to think that, there's some progress being made on a ceasefire. And I don't believe that's the case. And I believe that even if you get a ceasefire, it won't last long. And I believe, as I said during the course of the show today, that it won't be until we have significant pressure from the international economy on all of the actors before we get some sort of meaningful ceasefire and peace agreement. I just don't see much hope here. And it's, as I said, not just that the Iranians and the Americans have such different agendas at this point in time. It's also the fact that you have to take into account the Israelis and the lobby. And Those are two powerful actors who will go to great lengths to undermine any kind of meaningful agreement that the United States can and Israel and Iran can work out. So I think I'm more pessimistic than Trita is, but I hope he's right and I'm wrong. And I hope that, something can be done to put an end to this conflict sooner rather than later.